Is it possible to quantify in any useful sense the probability that the reasonable worst case or something worse will happen, alternatively the reasonable best case or something better with it? I'm just trying to get some kind of indication as to how confident can we be, for example, that the best and worst case scenarios you've outlined for freight traffic, that we're going to finish up somewhere in there. Can we be optimistic that it'll be better than that? Do we need to worry that there's a significant probability that it could be even worse than that? Is there a kind of a point in which you say a 60% probability, an 80% probability, a 5% probability? Is there anything even approximate that puts numbers on it?
We were often being asked to try and put probabilities around the assumptions, as you can imagine. I don't think we could do that with any other basis than a sort of finger in the air. Ultimately, it gets down to how people behave. The fundamental bottleneck on trucks going through Dover-Calais is how the French deal with the blockage. And you could take a very worst case assumption, which is that they will stop and not let anything go until every formality has been completely covered, and that will take days, and therefore, it will become extremely difficult to get things across the border. And the best case will be 100% of every trader and truck is ready as perfect documentation, and it goes through. So there are some boundaries, but they just are not realistic. So I don't think there was any way of doing this other than coming to a sensible judgment.
Or of course, the French officials take a similar risk-based assessment of the threat, which is what HMRC will be doing, which is exactly what they do now. And certainly my members would argue, well, if the goods are no different, the carriers are no different, the issues are no different at the first week of November than it was the last week of October. So it's purely a pragmatic observation.
Yes, we spent a lot of time worrying about what the French would do. We knew they would obey the rules, but we know they are also in favour of trying to get flow going. So somewhere between complete obeying the rules and a pragmatic approach is where they're likely to act. That might be impacted by the politics of the no deal and how fractious it is, but it's very hard to predict exactly how that would work.
So could I also offer just another view on how to think about Yellowhammer, because this is the process we went through when we saw the story. And my first question was, well, what are the assumptions that underlie all of this? So one of the big ones is the enforcement approach by French customs. But also there are some certain easements that have been agreed by each party in the run-up to March the 29th that removed some of the real showstopper issues that I've spoken to this committee about before. So, for example, the European Commission agreed that not every single journey made by a British truck into the EU would require one of these haulage permits, the ECMT permit. And there was a sort of a stay on of execution on that particular requirement that was signed off in Brussels and was valid until the end of the year, which was reasonably generous given an exit date in March, but was practically useless when it was rolled forward to October. So one of our big asks in Brussels has been for that concession, and a similar one was agreed for aviation issues, simply to be rolled forward by at least the period of time that Brexit had been delayed. Now, your assessment about the severity of delays would be very highly influenced by what you assumed the outcome of that to be. Because if those provisions were not eased, then it wouldn't simply be a question of being ready. As I've explained before, there simply are not enough permits to meet the demand. So it's a question of permission to travel rather than readiness to comply. It would be interesting to understand what assumptions were made in the assessment about those kind of easements, because if they were assumed to apply, if those easements were assumed to have been carried forward, then we need to make sure that happens. And there are similar easements that were allowed by the UK government. Karen's mentioned the safety and security declarations, which again would have a significant bearing on the number of trucks able to comply coming into the country. So again, was the assumption that easement would be renewed, or not, because it would significantly affect the outcome.